Okay, we've got some of our folks coming in to the webinar. Give it just a couple of minutes for people to join and then we can get started. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome everybody that is attending to this webinar, How to Win at Social Media, Even with No Budget, presented by Melissa Forziat, who is one of our, basically one of our team members, it seems, and we're always so happy to have her share her knowledge and expertise with us. And I'm with the Arkansas Small Business and Technology Development Center at the University of Arkansas, and we are here to help folks with small businesses or aspiring entrepreneurs either start or grow their business. So if you are not currently a client and live in the Northwest Arkansas area, I would encourage you to visit us at sbtdc at uark.edu. I'm sorry, that's sbtdc at uark.edu, and it'll be on the deck here so you can find the address. Anyway, with no more delay, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Melissa. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much for that, Julie. A huge thank you to you, to Julie, to Mary Beth, to everybody who has been putting these together with me. I've lost count of how many sessions we've done together over the years at this point. And for those who are returning guests to this, welcome back. It's so good to see you again. And for those who are brand new to any presentations with me, I'll give you just a little bit of intro on me, just so you have some idea what I'm bringing into this material, because my background and experience is relevant to how I teach this material. So I actually started out in my career doing major international sport events. So I worked Olympic Winter Games, I worked Rugby World Cup, I worked with the US Olympic Committee. So these huge brands that were operating at a very big scope and scale. And then about a dozen years ago, I started my own business. And I tried to figure out, how do you take those great principles of marketing that I learned at that very large scale with these organizations that had huge budget? And how do you make those principles work for businesses that were much smaller, maybe like yours, definitely like mine, where we don't have the same amount of resources, but we still need to get things done? So when I approach marketing, I approach it from a standpoint of what's viable, what's practical, what's realistic, what can you actually do? And not everybody who talks to small businesses about marketing is looking at it from that standpoint. So a lot of times people are a little bit flippant with how much budget you should be spending to do things. And this is where social media gets interesting, because while it is inherently a free tool, there's certainly a push to advertise on most platforms at this point. And so it can become a very expensive prospect, and people may push you to spend a lot of money to do it. But the question is, how do we do it within our means while still getting in front of people? So that's the approach that I'm taking to social media today, as a general overview. And with that said, before we get into the material itself, I wanted to share a few housekeeping items here. This is a great time to minimize distractions on your end. So if you have the ringer on your phone, if you have a messaging device on in the background, this is a good time to shut those things down, because the more you're thinking about this material in the context of your business, the more you're going to get out of it in real time. There are a lot of slides in this presentation, as there always are for my presentations. So I actually have put all of the slide deck and some additional resources together for you on a landing page of my website that I created for this, so that you can easily access all of the materials. And that link is going to be on the last slide, and also Julie will be sharing it out. The only thing that's not on that landing page that I've got for this presentation is the recording of this webinar, which Julie is currently grabbing and processing. So all of that will be sent out to you later. In terms of questions, a couple points on that. There may be questions that I ask you as we go through. And when you see slides that have questions on them, feel free to put your thoughts into the chat because I'll be looking for your answers there. So this is a good time to check that you know where the chat is and make sure it's set to everyone so that we can all see what you're saying. While you're there, this is a great time to introduce yourself. I just introduced myself, so I'd love to know a little bit more about who's on here with me live. Feel free to put your name, your business name, maybe a little bit what you do. You never know what other businesses might be here that could be collaborators for you. So this is a great opportunity to introduce yourself and see if there's anybody here on this call that you might be able to do business with in some way. In terms of, let's see, chat doesn't let me change to everyone. That might be something Julie can check out for you. Thank you for letting us know, because that is a feature we will want to use as we go through. Also, in terms of questions, if you have questions, which I imagine you will as we go along, I'm going to be breaking this presentation up into segments and looking at it in different, you'll see in a moment how I'm breaking this up, but I encourage you to share your questions at the end because that's when I'm going to be looking for those in the chat. So if you have a question as we go through, I would encourage you to make a note of it. So that you can remember to add it back later when I'm more actively looking in the chat for questions that come up. Okay, so those are the main points I wanted to make as we get started here. Now, as I sort of introduce how I'll be talking about social media today, I also want to talk about how I won't be talking about it. And here's how not to use social media. Sometimes a little finesse is required when you do marketing, and social media requires a lot of finesse. I mean, you can use social media however you want to, but whether or not you have success with that plan is a totally different story. And I find that, people who are really aggressively marketing on social media in terms of being salesy and asking people to buy things and being really pushy with calls to action, they tend to have less success than people who are using it in a more subtle way. And that's something to be aware of. And so when I'm presenting today, I'm going to be talking about how to do a more slow burn strategy that for a lot of business owners is a frustrating prospect because you're there to market. But nonetheless, I'm here to give you thoughts about what I've seen work the best. Here's what we'll be looking at today. So first of all, we're going to start with a general overview. Why are you social media marketing? What are some of the goals that you can be trying to achieve? What are some of the objectives you can be trying to reach? Then we're going to look at matching that purpose with the target market that you're trying to reach, if not target markets, because some of us may have more than one, many of us do. And then there are a couple specific areas that I want to focus in on a little bit more closely. So we'll look at showcasing your brand and creating conversation as two things that you could potentially do with your social media marketing. So we'll break it up into those 4 areas, but I also wanted to say what we're not going to be talking about today, because, we have an hour together here and I want to make sure that you're here if it's the right use of your time. I know we're all busy, right? So here's some of the things that I won't be addressing. And, in all of its many forms, paid advertising, things like boosting and retargeting and pixels and geo-targeting and pay per, all of this stuff. These are great topics to explore. They really need their own dedicated session. And, for me, these are enhancements of your plan, not the plan itself. So what I want to say about this, just to really reiterate why those aren't part of this conversation, I believe all of those tools, all of those advertising tools, they can expedite the reach of an already good social media marketing plan. But let's not consider them a replacement for one. Let's consider them, like I said, an enhancement. Without a good marketing plan in place, you end up wasting more of that money that you spend on advertising. You use it less efficiently. So we want to be as efficient as possible with whatever resources we're spending on our marketing, time, money, whatever. And so we're going to be really looking at the efficiency part of this first, and then you can build on, you can add on with things like advertising later. A visual that I really like around this to help explain why this is not a focus of today's discussion is, if you were really thirsty and you wanted to drink some water, would you pour that water into a glass or into a sieve? right? If you pour it into a sieve or a colander, it's got all these holes around the side. You're pouring the water and the water's coming out of the faucet, wherever it's coming out of, and it can't collect in the vessel that you're holding because there's holes all over it. So it keeps spilling out the sides. Whereas if you pour that water into a glass, there are no holes in it. You can drink the water, you can fill yourself up, right? So it's to me the same thing with marketing and advertising on social media. If you're advertising on social media, but you don't really have a solid way to capture those leads and stay in touch with them, they keep spilling out the sides of your marketing plan. So we're looking to make sure you have a really solid marketing plan first that you can build upon. So having said all of that, hopefully we're all in the right place. Let's jump in. Let's talk about how to win at social media, even with no budget. Okay, so the first things first, why are you social media marketing? What is the goal that you are trying to achieve when you market on social media? There are several that I want to talk about, 5 that I'd like to talk about actually today. And the first one is building your brand. Social media, when it's been many years since we've had social media at this point now, and it really was a game changer for a lot of us because back in the day, if you wanted to get information out about your business through a third party, there weren't a lot of options for that. There were some earned media outlets. There were things like radio and TV and newspaper and magazines, and there weren't so many of those to go around, and they had a limited amount of real estate. So if you wanted to put an ad, that was maybe an option. If you wanted to get featured, there was even less real estate for an option like that in most of these platforms or publications. And even if you did get featured, there were a lot of eyes, a lot of ears on whatever that story was, which was great. But you had no control over the edit. You could give quotes, you could give stats and information, but the story that was built around that was not within your control to that same extent. So there were pluses and minuses all those years ago. Yes, it could be a huge boon to your business to get that much visibility, but it was hard to get those opportunities. Now we've flipped that model. With social media, it's relatively simple and easy access to put out information about your business that you decide what the narrative is going to be, and you have complete control over that. But everybody has that. So pretty much every platform that we see out there is saturated, and it becomes a question of how do you cut through all of that noise to get in front of your audience and have them actually pay attention to you. That's the real trick, right? So, my hope for you as you think about this material is if somebody does get to you, can you get them to feel like they've gotten to know your business as quickly as possible? Like they are starting to make a connection to what you do or how you talk to them as soon as they can. Because if you can do that, you can at least keep people with you longer once they've heard about you, and that will help you as you grow your business. Now, another element that you could be going after is the building of your reputation. And this is actually a really important component when it comes to building a business. For most people, when they're making decisions about what to buy or, what to, as consumers, what to pursue or even where to spend their time, most people look for some kind of validation. There are different kinds of validation people look for, but most of us look for validation in some way. So the more that we as business owners can share things that look like they're boosting our reputation or sharing a strong reputation, the more likely people will be to pay attention to you and either refer you or buy something from you down the road. This can be a really tricky one for a lot of small business owners because so many people that I talk to feel uncomfortable about tooting their own horn or not being humble. There are a lot of different ways to deliver information about your reputation and about achievements that you've had. They don't all have to sound like bragging, but it really is about getting the information out there because most of your audience needs proof that your products and services are worthy of their investment. So this is something to consider. And the great thing about social media is there are a lot of ways to put information about your reputation out there. Now, this is somewhat linked to number 3, which is creating community. And creating community is to an extent an offshoot of that building of your reputation, because the bigger, the stronger your community is, the more reputable people are in your community, the stronger your reputation seems to be for your business. Somehow those things just tend to go hand in hand for us, but creating community is also its own thing. You can be seeking out new people to have in your community through social media relatively easily. It does take time, but they're all right there for you. And because, so many platforms give us a sense of what else that person is following, what else those people are interested in, we can really start honing in on that and looking for communities where our potential target market may be and bringing them back to us and having conversations with them. So creating community is a multifaceted thing on social media, and a really important one, because social media is called social media. It's built into the name. So, the idea of it is it's something that you do with people, that it becomes a conversation that enhances your business. Now, generating leads is goal number 4. And to me, generating leads is a byproduct of doing the first 3 things well. So if you've built your brand and your reputation and your community, and then you give people a way to connect with you directly, you can now get a lead. A lead being somebody whose name who you know how to reach again, who you can predictably reach again, who you can have a conversation with, and that conversation one-to-one can begin. It becomes a sales conversation at that point, not just a general marketing conversation. So with generating leads, you want to have a plan for doing those first 3 things, and then give them ways to connect with you directly. And any ways that you can find to do that can ultimately help build your list of contacts that you're reaching out to later, which brings us to our last goal, which is generating sales, which I believe is a byproduct of doing the first 4 things well. If you've built that brand, reputation, and community, and then you've given people a way to connect with you directly as leads, that can become a sale. And it's nice if that can happen really quickly. Sometimes it is a slower burn process, especially on social media. And I know that as business owners, a lot of you are probably using social media marketing for this goal and this goal alone, right? Like, you want sales. That's you. I understand you have to make your business's world go round. Money makes that happen, right? But how do you get there? And I have found that the businesses that spend all their time focusing on this goal and this goal alone tend to drive their audiences away, because what that looks like is sales posts all the time. Buy it now, show up at this event, coupon codes, promo codes for things, just constantly pictures of a thing and a price tag. It's really hard for people to engage with that, especially if they're not ready to buy right now. And so people will tend to steer a little bit clearer, especially if they are actively being solicited. If you've ever had that experience, feel free to tell me in the chat what that felt like to you. Is that something that drew you to the business that was doing it, or is it something that didn't? What was your experience with it? So this is something that we need to be aware of as business owners. We have to find that balance in how we're approaching people, even though I know that this is probably the most important goal for you in terms of your budget. How do you get there is the real question. So at the end of the day, you pick a strategy. What things are you really prioritizing? How are you going to approach them in terms of what you post about, how you engage with people? And with that in mind, I'd love to ask this question to everybody. Which of these strategies make sense for your business? What do you want to focus on as you start thinking about filling out your social media marketing plan? Do you want to focus on brand, reputation, community, leads, sales, a combination of these things? I'd love for you to think about this in the context of your business, what it feels like you really need to highlight right now in your marketing plan. And we'll use that as a foundation for you as a jumping off point so that you can build from there as this presentation goes on. But feel free to jump into the chat and let us know which of these things feel the most important for you to focus on at this stage in your business. And there don't need to necessarily be trends here. It's really about thinking about how this relates back to your business and what you want to be looking at overall here. And, once you've thought about the answer and put that in the chat, or if you're not on with me live, once you've thought about that answer and written it down for yourself, don't file that away. Continue to think about it as we continue to go through the material here, because how are you going to build on that and actively make that plan happen? So we're seeing a variety of answers here: community, leads, reputation, brand, sales, a little bit of everything we're seeing come in. Nikki's saying a combination of everything. All of them seem important. And so if that's the case, how are you going to balance that in terms of your time? What are some of the ways that you can start doing those things? We'll look into that a bit as we go forward here. But, I really appreciate everybody who's giving active thought to this question now. We're in the brand building and reputation establishing phase, says Sherry. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, right? So we'll look for some options on how to incorporate that into the plan. But when you've actually broken it down into these labels in this way, you can start thinking about the things that you're doing on social media and which of these boxes do they tick, and you can be more intentional about it along the way. So having said that, let's build on this a bit and talk about matching your purpose with your target market, or as a lot of small businesses need to consider, their target markets, because you probably have more than one, right? So let me put a quick definition to target markets. These are the people who'd be most likely to be interested in your product, service, program, your idea, whatever it is you're selling. These are the people who would be most likely to buy it. And this is a really important thing to reiterate for social media, because it's very easy to forget that it's your target markets you're trying to reach, not everybody. You don't need to reach everybody. Social media makes a big deal to say, oh, this is how many people exist on that platform, or, there are this many people in all of these different groups. That's nice. But are they people who would be most likely to buy what you're selling under the right conditions? Because if they're not, you can talk to them as much as you want and you're still not going to get sales from it. If you're having connection and conversation with people who are in your target market, they may or may not be ready to buy something from you today. But in theory, over time, when the conditions are right, they could be interested. So those are the people you're most interested to connect with and find on social media, wherever those people are. So if that makes sense, the question becomes, which target markets are actually aligned with your social media strategy? You may be on different platforms. You may be marketing in different places that aren't just social media, and you aren't necessarily trying to reach all the same people in each of those places. In fact, most of the time we aren't. A lot of times it helps if we can be more targeted about who we reach where, because then our messages to them can be more specific. Which markets are actually aligned with your social media strategy, and on which platforms? This is a question to consider, because again, you don't want to be reaching everyone. You want to be calling in the audiences that you want to pay attention to your message. And the more specifically you can do that, the more likely they are to listen, because they think that your message is relevant for them. So the more general we go, the less people are inclined to listen to us. The opposite of what we want. Even though it seems like the safest way to get the biggest group to still pay attention to us, it has the opposite effect usually. So when you think about that, how do you then match up your target markets with social media in how you use whatever platforms you're on? I'd like to give you a couple of examples to show you how that question can change your approach. So the first one I wanted to look at here is, let's say you have a business where you're trying to attract human resources directors of local companies. So likely this would be a business to business setup. And okay, so if we think about this example, let's go through the first 4 objectives that I talked about earlier, assuming that sales will be derived from doing these things eventually. Let's look at those first 4 elements. Okay, so if you're trying to reach HR directors and you're on social media, from a brand standpoint, what is it these people need to see? Well, for one thing, they kind of need to know what it's like to do business with you. right? They are looking for vendors. They probably have a number of different vendors they're considering. And one of the factors for them in deciding between those vendors is figuring out, what company values do you have? How do you do business? What are some of the things that they can expect from you? And then does that align with how their company does business and their company's values? So the more you can put out about, this is what we stand for, this is what we offer, this is how we operate, the more they can understand if that's actually a good fit for them. Then we look at reputation. You know, the HR director may be the sole decision maker. They may not be the sole decision maker. But either way, they probably still need to justify why they're going with this company as a vendor over this other company, or as a supplier, whatever their term may be. So they're going to need to have some evidence, some proof that the company that they went with is good at doing what they do, that the products or services are quality. They need to be able to show that there's some backup to this decision. So anything that you can do to bolster your reputation and to share the strength of your reputation with them as and make it really easy for them, that will help the process along. And that can look like sharing stats, that can look like sharing accolades, that can look like sharing, evidence of other third parties who trust you, the articles that have been put out, interviews that have been put out, speaking engagements you've done, whatever you can say about the business, how long you've been in business, how many clients you've served, you know, do clients continue to work with you over and over again? The size of your team, all of these things are potentially ways to capture an HR director's attention and say, look, this business is not fly by night. We've been at this for a while and we do a good job. And then again, community is an extension of all this. Who else trusts and does business with you? And how can you show that as easily as possible? One of the things that could end up being a deciding factor for an HR director, if everything else is about the same, if two companies put in a bid and the bid amount is about the same for each, and they both seem to have a really strong reputation and both seem to mesh really well in terms of brand, one thing that could be a deciding factor is, who else is in your network? Who else have you worked with? And do you bring this HR director a degree closer in connection to somebody else, some other company that they want to connect with later? That could be something that pushes your company over the edge, right? So the more information you can share about this, the better. Sometimes showing the strength of a community is about showing the volume of people in it, and that can be impressive. Sometimes it's not necessarily about the volume, but about the quality of connections you have. So the more you can emphasize that, the better you are. Generating leads, let's talk about that one. If you're trying to reach HR directors, here's the question. Where can you actually engage with them directly? I can't tell you how many times it's happened where I'll talk with somebody about a general marketing plan and they'll say, I really don't know much about how to use social media. I'd like some advice on it. And I'll say, well, who are you actually trying to reach? And if they come to me with an answer like this, the HR directors of local companies, I'll say, okay, so you actually know exactly who you want to reach and where they are. You're not just trying to reach a general market. And they'll say, yeah. And I'll say, well, which platforms are actually designed for that? Because, something like Facebook or something like Instagram or something like TikTok, they're meant to be used in ways that are much more broad and general. And you don't even actually know if an HR director is going to be allowed to use those platforms at work during the day. The people that you're most likely to engage with, if you engage with the company social media platform, is the social media managers, not the HR directors. So is that a good use of your time? Whereas a platform like LinkedIn might be more designed to have these people with individual profiles. It might be where they're engaging. It might be where they're looking for contacts themselves. And so the connections that you make with them directly may be more worthwhile there. There could be specific groups on different platforms that they're involved in. Like, these are the things that you need to be looking for to decide where you actually need to be in order to get directly in front of the people you are trying to reach, not just the world at large. So as you start looking through this model, you start to see how specific the plan needs to be to engage with HR directors for this business. And I want to show you one more example to show you why it can be so different. So let's say we've got a business who you want to attract engaged couples who are planning a wedding. So the last example was business to business, B2B, but this one is probably more B2C, right? Business to consumer. And you're getting in front of people who have personal agendas here that they're trying to fulfill. So again, let's look at those top 4 goals. Okay, brand. What's interesting about this is it's really kind of about putting it back on them, on the potential customer. This is really about showing how you'll showcase them and their love. How do you do what you do? And does that line up with how they want things done? Is your model of doing business, is your way of doing business in alignment with the day they want to build for themselves? So this is something that you'll want to be able to show them in as many ways as you can. Now, reputation, of course, is important. I mean, this is hopefully the biggest, best day of their lives to this point, and they need to trust the vendors that they bring on to be able to execute that well. And so the more evidence you can give them that your products and services are good, they're quality, they're strong, that they're going to be really proud and happy they hired you. This is something that you want to communicate however you possibly can. And again, that can be through stating awards. It can be giving examples of your work. A lot of times we'll see companies that are in this marketplace, they might be trying to do experiential examples of their marketing. They might be showing videos or photos. They might be, just giving examples of what it looks like to experience their products or services. And then by extension, we get number 3, the community piece. Showing examples of other couples who have benefited from the products and services of this business could go a long way. And again, it could be a volume of people. It could be about, caliber of people, quality of people, showing other people in the target market. It can be sort of doing profiles on previous customers and giving little bits of information about them where other engaged couples might be able to say, ooh, that's just like me. That's just like us. We can be described in that same way. So this obviously is a good company for us to work with too. And again, community and reputation are linked. So the more you can show that other people have trusted you with their big day, the more people will want to do that with theirs. So, these are all elements that can really capture those engaged couples. In terms of generating leads, okay, help them imagine the results, give them a sense of the experience, and how do you then encourage them to contact you directly? They're probably looking at a lot of vendors at once. So in what ways can you incentivize them to start a conversation with you? In what ways can you get them onto a list where you can contact them directly? What options do you have to get them out of the I'm just looking phase and into the let's start talking phase? So these are some things to look at here. And when you think about what this is starting to build for us, what kinds of platforms would make sense for engaged couples? Of course, what your product or service is does have some bearing on this, but do you want to have a platform that lets you use a lot of video? Do you want like a YouTube or a TikTok? Do you want something that does a lot of images like Instagram? Do you want people of a certain age bracket? That might impact things as well. Where can you give them more of that experience? And how can you lean into that as much as possible? So as you start thinking about these different profiles, you start to see actually you need to be in different places doing different things. And even within that, let's say you decided that you wanted to be on Instagram. Well, how do you actually get in front of these people? What other accounts are they following? Where can you start engaging with people who are most likely to be in this situation? So, it's not just about finding the right house, it's also about finding the right room to be in. So I'd like to build on a couple of these elements, and I want to look first at showcasing your brand. So when it comes to showcasing your brand, again, this is one of the great advantages we have in being able to control our own marketing messages. We get to say what we want to about our brand. For the most part, I know there are a couple industries that might have some exceptions to that. But for the most part, you get to decide how you talk about your business. And in doing so, you decide what people you're calling in. There are different approaches that we can take to this. And so if we're generally accepting the idea that we're not just trying to say, buy this, buy that, this is on sale until the following date. If it's not always about putting up a picture of a thing and a price tag, what are your other options that for creating conversation, for getting people to be engaged with the content that you're putting out there? I'm going to break this into a bunch of different areas, but the whole picture of this is a little thing that I would call selling without selling. You know, when you think about, for example, if you walk past a bakery in the morning when they're getting things ready to go and you smell the smell of freshly baked cookies, that smell could turn your head and can make you walk into that bakery, or it might make you look at that storefront and remember their name for later, right? Maybe that's the reason you walk into the bakery today. Maybe that's the reason you walk in later. But anyway, it was the smell of the cookie that drew you in. That's how it works for me anyway, right? So that's the idea of selling without selling. You know, social media tends to work better if you focus on giving people a taste, giving people an example, giving people the smell of the cookie, and not necessarily just hitting them hard with sales messages. Okay, so what are some ways to do that? What are some things you can focus on in the content that you put out or in the comments that you put out? Concepts and ideas is certainly one element. You know, what does your product or service do, and how can you talk about why that's important in the world? Whether or not somebody buys your stuff is another issue. But the fact that you're putting these things out there, why is the whole category important? What does it mean for the people who could potentially buy it? So you can talk about that. You can talk about values. And values is about how you do business. You know, there, you may have many competitors, but you might not all do business in exactly the same way. So how are you going to show up day in and day out in your delivery of your products and services? Because whatever that looks like, you want to match that in your marketing so that when people say, yes, I'm going to buy this from you, they're getting what they thought they were going to get. Philosophies could potentially be another thing to look at here. Maybe the way that you approach business, maybe you have a philosophical approach that is unique in your marketplace. That can be something that you can talk about, and you can talk about why it's that way, and people can link up with you if ideologically they're on the same page. Stories. This is another element. And there are ways to story tell through actually kind of all of these different elements that are on this list. But storytelling can be talking about how the business got started, what drove you to do it, what does your day look like, stories of your employees or other customers or partners that you've got. There's so many different ways to talk about stories, good experiences that you've had, the worst experiences that you've had, experiences you've learned from. There's so many different types of stories that we can share that can connect people back to your business. Couple more to look at here. The senses, tapping into the senses can be a really interesting one to do. Depends on what your business is. You know, does this sound right for your business? Great. Well, maybe try to do more of that. I'll give you an example of that in a minute. But, you know, can you tap into people's sense of smell, touch, taste, sight, hearing, any of that? And how can you get them to start thinking in multiple ways about your product or service? Because chances are that's going to hook them more if your business it lends itself to that kind of marketing. And then the last one is emotions. Emotions is a little tricky because there are different kind of buyers in the marketplace. There are different social styles when it comes to selling to people. Some people are drawn towards emotional marketing, and some people are going to steer as clear from it as they possibly can. And that is just a factor in our personalities that we have to consider. But some businesses, some products and services lend themselves really well to tapping into emotions when you market. So this is the kind of thing that you want to play with. You want to measure the results of it as much as you can so you can see, is this working? Is this drawing more people towards me than the people that it's driving away? But some businesses use this piece really, really well. And, you know, it's just about testing it out and seeing which of these things will actually work for you. So having said that, I wanted to look at a couple of these in more detail because, you know, I encourage you to go start looking at other people's marketing and think, well, what categories of the selling without selling do these things meet? But I wanted to look at a couple things that I do very little of. So I wanted to sort of focus on these because you may see examples out in the world that feel really relevant to you. So sensory marketing, this is about trying to market in a way that taps into touch, sight, hearing, smell, taste, any of these, or a combination thereof. And how can you do that, especially on social media where you're just looking at a screen? Okay, so let's look at something like this. This is an example, an old example from Aston Martin. And so we've got this description here with a roar of the engine. Vantage is in hot pursuit. Got a couple hashtags here. We've got these images here, 3 different images, all beautiful in their own right. Now, what are we actually getting from this post? We hear roar of the engine, so you can sort of hear the engine roaring. Hot pursuit, you can feel that. 2 of these pictures have a blur effect. So yeah, Stephanie, that's exactly what I was thinking. The blur of the images. You can feel the speed. I don't know. Actually, these are really crisp images. It's kind of they used really good quality cameras here to capture this the way they did, because you can feel the speed, but the car is like perfectly in focus. And so it just makes you feel what it would be like to be in there. That picture on the bottom right, can you feel what would be like to sit in that interior on a warm day with the sun coming in? Can you smell the inside of that car? Like you can build a whole profile around this experience just by what you're looking at here. You know what Aston Martin didn't do? They didn't say Vantage equals $ amount. They didn't say what the price tag was. They didn't even say buy it now. They just make you want this car. If they showed you a price tag, that would probably drive a whole bunch of people away. But what they're doing here is they're making this something to aspire to. And maybe you could buy it today. Maybe this is your dream car, whatever. They want you thinking about this car and this car only. So this is an approach that they took. Let me show you another example. I'm going to make you as hungry as I can today. So Nestle Toll House, not 1 but 2 delicious looking Nestle Toll House Facebook posts here. Okay, let's think about what they're actually doing here. What better way to celebrate National Chocolate Chip Cookie Day than with the original cookie? Fudge and cookies, say no more. We've got 1 recipe link for each of these things because they want to take you back to their website. They want you going back to their website from social media so they can hit you with all their other more targeted marketing. That is the goal. So, that's why they have these recipe links in there. But when you look at these, again, they're not saying Nestle Toll House chocolate chip cookies equal $ amount. Buy it now, coupon code for, they're not saying that. What they're doing is they're showing you this picture on the left with these cookies that you want to eat. They're showing me this bottom cookie, this cookie that's broken open with that 1 chocolate chip that's oozing out onto the table. They're warm, they're melty, they're fresh out of the oven. I've been on this slide long enough that you may be feeling hungry. And if that's what's happening for you, that's marketing that's working. So, they're making you experience something. And in this case, it might be the smell, it might be the taste of it. It could be the feeling of a warm cookie in your hands. These are some things that they're trying to tap into. So yes, we're just looking at a screen, but these particular companies have products that let you go beyond that and try to give people an experience. On the other hand, I'd like to look at emotions. And I said, caveat, emotion marketing can be really tricky, but there's so many different types of emotions out there that you could try to tap into. And I wanted to look at a couple of examples of companies that have done that with their marketing. This example from Kleenex was actually from around the early stages of COVID. And it's a really interesting angle that they took. There's comfort in knowing we're not alone. There can be strength in sharing our vulnerabilities. Share hashtag all the feelings you're feeling. So even though we're apart, we can feel together at Kleenex. Okay, first of all, they're showing us images that might, especially at that time, make you cry, thereby needing their product, Kleenex, to solve your problem. um, they're really laying it on thick in terms of both the time period they were in and what the product actually does. This makes sense for them. Would it make sense for them all the time? Does it make sense for them with every customer on the planet? Maybe not, but this is something that they were experimenting with. And then you need to gather the results and see what works for you here. I want to show you a different example, but it's still tapping into emotions. Here's this one from the sleep lady. The graphic says, your baby who got through the last sleep regression and was finally sleeping well day and night is suddenly waking early from her naps and up all night. And you look at the description, you're tired and she's tired. It's the 7-month sleep regression in full swing. They're going to give you a link to read more because the assumption is that you told me about a problem because clearly you have a solution. So they're trying to get people back to their website. Again, generating leads. How can you get people to your website? And then how can you get them to self-identify once they're there? But think about what they're saying here. They're talking, you love your baby, but you're exhausted and your baby is exhausted and it's probably stressful and you're tired and your nerves are shot. That's what they're saying. And if you've ever felt this, you probably deeply feel this post, and it calls you in a way that it might not have if they just said, learn about the last sleep regression here. So again, they're really laying it on thick, but they're trying to tap into those emotions. Now, the question I want to ask you, when you think about all of these different ways of selling without selling, really think about your business, your products, your services, and the target markets you want to reach that you've been laying out for yourself here. Which of these concepts or which of these things can you engage in your marketing? So can you do concepts, values, philosophies, stories, senses, emotions, a combination of these things? Is there something else more specific that you want to write here? Think about this in the context of your business, and feel free to jump into the chat and let me know which of these things feel most relevant to what you are actually trying to sell. Because if you can decide on this piece, it actually answers a lot of questions about how to do your content and how to connect with people as well outside of that. So these are some things to think about and to really hone in on when you think about the big picture of what you're trying to market anytime you're trying to do a selling without selling approach. So as you all consider that piece, I do want to just say, use the tools that you have that forward your purpose for the target market you have. It doesn't need to be that you're marketing exactly the same way as every business that's here today or every business that you're seeing. But when you go out into the world and you look at examples of other businesses that market, really think about what would work for you to tap into as well. I did want to look at one more element here, and that's creating conversation. And this, of course, is important because it's social media. We're supposed to be talking with people as much as we can. And the more conversation that gets created, the more people will see about your business. So, a question for you to think about, and this is just something that is sort of a self-assessment at this stage. Does your social media strategy prioritize posting or engagement? Where would you say you are in this spectrum? Is it more posting? Is it more engagement? Is it a balance of the two? I haven't defined engagement yet, but I want you to think to yourself really quickly, which things are you actually prioritizing here in your social media strategy now? If you're just getting started on social media, you get to create this from the ground up. But what are you doing now and where do you need to get to? So let's look at this. What do I actually mean by engagement? I want people talking with you and about you as much as you can make that happen. One of the reasons, again, why hard sales posts all the time don't typically work is that if people don't need to buy something from you right now, there's nothing to say to you. So people don't say things. So the more you can get people reacting to what you put out there, the more you can get them sharing what you put out there or commenting on what you put out there, the more people will see it, because social media starts to think, oh, this person has a thing to say that's important. We want to show it to more people. The more you can make that happen, it's a cycle that feeds itself. So you want to get people talking. And, again, people can engage through liking, comment marketing, sharing hashtags, and you can do that on other platforms. You could be going to other pages where your target market exists, or other places where your target market exists on social media, and you can be liking other people's posts, comment marketing, sharing their content, engaging in conversations that are happening through specific hashtags. And in doing so, bringing people back to your page. Who's this interesting person who has all these cool things to say? And they start now looking back at what you've been putting out there, and they've been introduced to your business. I want to show you two examples of a company that's doing that. This example is a company doing it well, and one of a company not doing it as well. I'm going to show you an example from Starbucks from way back. And this is, I didn't even show you the post because that wasn't important here. Starbucks does a post, 3,800 people at this point had liked the post or reacted, 372 comments, 412 shares. What are you noticing about this? Well, the thing I notice is that Starbucks has responded to everybody, whether they had a compliment, a question, a complaint, whatever they said, Starbucks responded. If the person responded again, they responded again. They were really actively stoking this conversation. And the more comments were getting put in here, the more people saw it. My assumption is that whether or not they advertised this post, they did themselves a lot of favors by continuing to stoke the conversation through every single comment that was made. And if we look at this, we can see that Starbucks responded to everybody. So what does that make us feel about this company? Whereas we get an example from Hallmark. This is from some Halloweens back, and I was really struck by what I was seeing from Hallmark, and that this wasn't how I expected a company like this would be engaging or not engaging on social media. Here, let's say that whether or not they did advertise this post, 2,400 reactions, look at the number of comments and shares. Very, very different from what we saw from Starbucks. And look at this comment section. You've got people who have questions. You've got people who have complaints. And Hallmark is nowhere to be found. They aren't even any of the likes on any of these comments. In fact, somebody even said your prices are way too high. And somebody else jumped in and said, we actually have a fix for that. And this was a way that Hallmark could have jumped in and said, you should check out our cards in this price category and put a link to it. That was an opportunity for them that they didn't take. So not only did they not do themselves any favors in stoking this conversation, but the people who wrote to them didn't get a response, and we can see that. So on many levels, it affects how we consider their customer service by how they are or are not engaging on social media. So this is examples of companies and how they respond on their own pages. But you can also think, how do you go out into the world and engage on other pages to get people coming back to you and get them interested about what you're saying? Ultimately, all of this comes back to where are you driving the conversation? Getting people to come back to your page, getting people to go to your website. You've seen some examples here of companies that have been trying to get people back to their website, and there's a reason they're doing that, because they want to continue people down that pipeline, that process of getting further and further closer to their email list or closer to buying a thing. Where are you driving the conversations when you start them on social media? And I ask that for one very important reason. What happens if the platform you're on disappears? If it's glitchy one day when you need it? Or if the terms and conditions change, which we have certainly seen examples of, or the company goes out of business. Any social media platform is a company that you don't run. You don't have control over what they do. And if that's the only place you're marketing your business, and if that's the only place where you're reaching your audience, it's very risky. So the more you can bring those people back to your website, get them on your email list, get their contact information, get their addresses, whatever, how can you make sure that you can start finding reliable ways to get in front of them that aren't just on the social media platform where you originally found them? This is, again, all part of that question. Where are you driving this conversation? And it's an important one if you want stability in your business long term. I know I've been piling a lot of ideas in here for an hour. I want to make sure we save a little time for questions. So, as a reminder, here are some topics we talked about and, some things that you could ask about, some of the objectives we talked about. Why are you social media marketing? How do you match that purpose with your target market? We looked a little bit more closely at showcasing your brand and creating conversation. So again, this is a great time to put your questions into the chat if you have any that you want me to address live here. As you're doing that, again, in a moment, I'm going to put a link on screen that shows where you can access the landing page on my website with more information. Some of the things that are in there, of course, the whole slide deck, but also I've got a couple exercises in there, finding an appropriate tone for right now, which is a little bit more of a PR type of exercise. Also creating a signature line, which is how you can start thinking about getting people to calls to action, getting people to the next place. There's a number of different free blogs that I've also included and embedded into that landing page. So a lot of further reading that you can do depending on what you're looking to achieve here. This top link, of course, is going to be the landing page on my website. We'll try to throw that into the chat here in just a moment. And I'm sure Julie will also be sharing that. And this second link is a way that you can access the ASB TDC if you want to talk to them for consulting or for coaching and advising. So I want to throw it over to Julie here to add any information about that.
Thanks, Melissa. Yes, the link for the recording and the link to Melissa's materials will be sent to you in an email. So be sure and check your email. Another thing too, it's really helpful for us when you fill out the survey that we send after our webinars, and it helps us plan for future topics and gives us some insight into what really interests you, what your needs are, and how we can help you. Again, if you are interested in becoming a client and are not already, go to our webpage at sbtdc.uart.edu, and there is a get a consultation button in the upper right hand corner. You'll be assigned to one of our consultants who can help you with whatever you need with your business or for your idea. And we look forward to seeing you at another training and or in our office. So any other questions, go ahead and post them now, and we will get Melissa to address those before we wrap up.
And it's okay if it's something specific to your business. But I know I threw a lot of information and thoughts at you today. So hopefully everybody found at least one or two things that you can start tweaking and working on to enhance what you're doing for social media. And if you're brand new to your business or social media, hopefully this gave you some things to think about that'll keep you moving forward as well.
Okay, I don't see any questions in the chat, so let me just thank Melissa again for another great presentation, and we will look forward to seeing you in the future.
We actually do have one question that just
Oh,
came
good.
in
Here we go.
from Sherry. Can brand, community, and reputation constitute brand pillars? Brand pillars, I think it's a broad category, right? I mean, I think you can get even more specific in terms of what you think about as the pillars of your social media marketing plan. But I do think that there are elements that you can factor in, and there are a lot of ways to do each. So when you think about brand, your brand isn't just one thing. What are all the ways that you can describe your brand? And each of those could actually be a pillar. Community, are there different communities that you're trying to reach? And if so, how are you approaching each of those? Reputation, there could be a bunch of different ways that you approach that. Can you talk about Is there content that other people have shared about your business that you can share? Is there, interviews that you've done? Are there testimonials that you can share? Are there, there's so many different categories of how your reputation can even come in. So, um, brand, community, and reputation are very big terms to use, and you may want to start dialing in a little bit further as you think about what your content would look like or your engagement would look like week to week. But thank you for that question. It's a really good question.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, we'll go ahead and close now. And Melissa, thanks again for all this great information, and everyone have a great summer. We'll see you soon, I hope.
Bye.
Bye-bye.